Hi, y'all. Carla here. While we take a short break before season 4 of Let's Go There begins, we wanted to bring back some of your favorite conversations from this past year. These episodes meant so much to me, and I know they'll spark something for you too, whether you're hearing them again or for the very first time. So sit back, enjoy this refeatured episode, and I can't wait to be back with you soon for all new conversations. Elaine Pagels, a renowned historian of religion and Princeton professor, has spent decades uncovering the hidden depths of faith, Gnosticism, and early Christianity. A MacArthur Fellow, she is best known for the Gnostic Gospels, The Origin of Satan, and Beyond Belief, which challenge and expand our understanding of religion's role in politics, sexuality, and society. Her most personal work, Why Religion? A Personal Story, explores her own journey and the deeper reasons behind our search for meaning. Hey, y'all. Let's go there. Elaine, I am so very honored and touched to have your beautiful soul and big giant brain on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to see you and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I like to tell our audience how we know one another. I don't know if you recall this, but when I was new to the Aspen Institute board, they put us in a breakout room to do a
Yeah.
little bit of an icebreaker. Margot was the new chair of the board, and they brought us into the room, and we all told like a personal story, something that a profound experience in our lives that impacted us. And you were so real and raw and authentic in that moment. I thought, wow, that is a special woman. I want to get to know her. And then a
I
year
don't even
passed.
remember what I said.
Yeah. Well, you spoke about the death, and we'll get to this. Well, you spoke of the death of your son and husband,
Oh, yeah.
and but you did so with like such love and light, and I just thought, wow, this woman is incredible. And then a year or so later, we found ourselves in Aspen together, and I just felt that instant connection again, and opened up to you about going through a very profound spiritual awakening myself, and you gifted me your memoir. And that was I in my mind, that was the beginning of our friendship.
Well, that's wonderful. I never thought when I wrote a personal story that I would ever publish it. It wasn't meant for that. It was a deep exploration. But then when I wrote it, I thought, well, there's some things here that could be embarrassing and don't make me look so good. But this is just a person's story. I mean, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that the questions that come up in the work I do are part of what comes up in anyone's life.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, isn't that the truth? So let's talk a little bit about the work that you do. So when I describe you to people that I know, I and forgive me because I don't mean to sound irreverent, but I describe you as the Indiana Jones of religious texts. And I
Oh, I,
I
I, I like that. I like that.
I envision you adventuring around the world, literally uncovering buried texts, translating them, just shining a light on them for the world. And so that's how I describe you. And then obviously a professor of religious studies at Princeton. But how do you describe your work yourself, Elaine?
It's an exploration of questions that I need to explore for myself. And people have said, who are you writing for? Well, I sort of know the kind of people that might be interested in the books, people who got some acquaintance with Christianity, questions about religion. Maybe they've left it. Maybe they're uncomfortable with it or just looking at lots of other religious traditions. But I'm really writing because these are the questions I needed to explore
Mhm.
for
And
myself.
what made you need to explore them? Where did this come from?
Well, as I wrote in that book, I was brought up in a family like many that we both know, that in which, say, the grandparents would have been associated with religious traditions
Mhm.
quite intimately. But my parents were not. I mean, occasionally we went to a Methodist church. We weren't Christian. But my father had given it all up for Darwin when he suddenly discovered the story of evolution. And his family was, I always think of them as ferociously Presbyterian. I mean, he said they were arguing all the time about religion, and it was very disturbing to him. And in that tradition, John Calvin's tradition, people are dangling sometimes over the fires of hell all
Mm,
the time.
mm,
It's a frightening tradition. It can be.
yeah.
It can also be comforting, but that's not what they got. So he left that all out. And I was brought up to think religion is just insignificant. It's just a vestigial relic of some prehistoric creature that we've lost that capacity and we don't need it. But I did. And I was reading poetry. I love music, dance, and all of the music and the dance and the poetry I love best. Most of it came out of religious tradition,
Mm,
whether it's uh, African American spirituals, whether it's Palestrina and Mozart, or Bach, or uh, John Donne, or uh, contemporary poets. Um, the music, the poetry, and much of the dance. I was interested in contemporary dance,
mhm.
come out of those traditions. And there's a reason for that because they open up the imagination. So when I first encountered evangelical Christianity in a powerful way, I just felt like the skies opened up. Oh, yes, it's not a closed ceiling anymore, just what we can see, scientifically. There's a whole world of different realities. Where they are is hard to say. Some people would say in the imagination, in the universe. I don't know. But it opened me up to so much more that had been closed off by this idea that religion is gone.
Mm. So, do you consider yourself now, Elaine, a religious person?
Yes. I couldn't help it. I'm just totally susceptible to it. I mean, if you put me in a bar mitzvah or a compline service, which is a Catholic service in monasteries for the morning and the evening, I just love it. It can be Greek Orthodox. It could be a Buddhist funeral, which I recently attended on Zoom
Mm,
with a friend of ours in Colorado for her husband. So there's something about that reaching for some transcendent connection with a transcendent experience that I just needed and
yeah.
still do.
So it's interesting. I can relate so much to what you're saying personally, but it's funny the term religious is so charged that I've always described myself as spiritual because I've been afraid to attach myself to any one religion because of everything that comes along with it and all of the societal constructs. How do you differentiate the two and how do you describe yourself in that religious context?
Yes, it's a really good question. I mean, when we say the word religion, somebody will think, "Oh, you're a Catholic, you're a Presbyterian, you're a Buddhist. You know, what do you believe?" And all of those questions come out of a preoccupation with Christianity as supposedly the dominant religion in the world. Well, it actually is, literally speaking, because it got very hooked on sets of beliefs. I'm not much interested in sets of beliefs. I don't really like them. The creed, okay, most people who say it don't know what it means, where it came from, what it's about in the context of, you know, 1600 years ago. That doesn't interest me anywhere near as much as the kinds of experience we have. And that's why you speak of what's spiritual,
Mhm.
because it's not definable in terms of some religious group,
Mhm.
right? It's something that you have experienced. It could be anywhere with your family, with nature, with any kind of experience that breaks us open.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about what took you from someone who is religious to someone who is religious and curious and a bit of a challenger. So at a very young age, you talk about this in your book, Why Religion. At a very young age, you were in love. If I'm not mistaken, you were around 15 years old. You were in love, and you lost your love in an accident. Will you tell us that story and how that was the spark, in my opinion, the spark behind your work?
Yes. I mean, I had been not very much associated with religion, except it always moved me in any church. Um, but when I was 14 or so, I went to this evangelical crusade and it was powerful. It opened me up. I got saved. It was like I was connected with the realities beyond ourselves.
Mhm.
It was wonderful. And I spent about a year with that group, very intensely involved. But the episode you speak of is when one of somebody I loved in high school, was 16 years old, um, was suddenly killed in an automobile accident. And I was terribly shocked. It's a very intense, lively, brilliant young life. Just how could he be dead? It just seemed impossible. And I was totally shocked and devastated and went back to the church and I said, my friend was just killed in an automobile accident. And they said, well, that's terrible. Was he born again? And I said, no, he was Jewish. And they said to me, well, then he's in hell.
Mm.
And I really felt like they'd socked me in the stomach. I was so shocked
Mhm.
because I took seriously what they'd said about the love of God. I
Yeah,
thought, wasn't Jesus Jewish? What are you talking about?
yeah,
But
yeah,
but when I heard that, I just finally turned around and walked out of there by myself, and I never went back.
yeah. But rather, and I'm so sorry for that loss, Lane. Even all these years later, I'm very sorry for that loss. But all in light of that, you walked out of that church, but you didn't walk away from religion. That started, from my perspective, a lifelong pursuit of seeking answers, and studying.
For a while, there were a few years in between
Yeah,
because I just took off and went to New York, and I wanted um, to be a professional dancer. I was loved the dance of Martha Graham because it was also very ritualistic and very moving and amazing kinds of movement. It was great. So I wanted to do that.
yeah.
But what I found out uh, in the Martha Graham studio is that I was pretty good, but in New York, that's nowhere. You can't be a professional. The others had started at the age of what, 7,
Yeah.
and I hadn't. So I just thought, wait a minute, got to have a plan B. And then I kept thinking, but 4 years after I left those churches, I kept thinking, what was it that was so powerful? Something powerful happened.
Mhm.
I couldn't deny it. But what was it? And why? And what really happened? I mean, how did Christianity start anyway? So that's when I started to really say, okay, second thing I want to do, if I can't be a dancer professionally, is try to understand what it was. I was told religion was obsolete, but it transforms people's lives.
Mm.
Um, how does that happen? So I went back to a university that is secular. I didn't want to go to a religious university. I thought I'd get somebody else's brand, Baptist, Presbyterian, Catholic, whatever. Didn't want that. So I went back to a secular university. You could study in graduate school Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, or Christianity. And since Christianity was what I was contending with, I went there to find out, what do we know about this historically?
Mm. Mhm. And what did you find when you were there?
Well,
It wasn't easy, but what?
surprises, some surprises on the way. First of all kinds of things. I found out that the Gospels were not written by Jesus's disciples, most likely, but people who put their names in much later. These were anonymous writings. Second, they were written not at the time of Jesus. Nobody was doing transcripts out on the hills of Galilee. Some prophet out there. Most of them couldn't write or read, but these are written generations later,
Yeah.
for the most part. And and then the real surprise was that suddenly our group of scholars, graduate students and faculty, was given the privilege of reading and translating 51, 52 texts actually from Egypt that had been discovered years before, but just closeted away by scholars who hid it. We had, and this find of ancient Christian texts, some of them are actually Jewish texts, some have Greek and Egyptian imagery in them instead, but their sacred library came out of nearly 2,000 years ago, and some of them were gospels.
Are these the Gnostic Gospels that you're referring to?
Yeah, that's what we called them because we didn't know what to call them.
Hmm.
But the difference between the New Testament Gospels claim to report what Jesus taught on the hills of Galilee, right? But these say that when he was talking privately to certain disciples secretly, away from the crowds, he gave them advanced level teaching, which was deeper than the parables that are told in the New Testament.
Mhm.
And these texts that were found, some of them claim to report what he taught secretly. Do they? We don't know for sure. How do we know? We don't know that about the New Testament Gospels either for sure.
Yeah. But it's
But
exciting nonetheless.
but it was enormously exciting, partly because, say, the first one that fascinated me was called the Gospel of Thomas, and it claims to be the secret sayings that Jesus taught privately. There are no episodes, there are no stories in the Gospel of Thomas. It's just a list, about 15-page list of sayings of Jesus. And half of them are identical to what you find in Matthew and Luke in the New Testament.
Hmm.
But the other half are amazing. And they go into what we crudely call a mystical direction. I mean, the words spiritual and mystical and religious are all fuzzy, as you said,
Mhm.
but these go into a deeper level. And when I first opened this text and it said that, these are the secret sayings of Jesus, I came across the one I always speak about, number 70, in which Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you.
Hmm.
If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
Ooh.
And I thought, oh, well, yes,
Wow.
that's true, right? I
Very
knew that.
true.
Later, I understood that it wasn't just a psychological statement, it's also a spiritual one. But I was very struck. I thought, you don't have to believe this, but these are powerful sayings.
Hmm.
And,
Absolutely.
and then we found the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Truth, a beautiful story. So we had the joy and the challenge of writing about these at the time when anybody in any churches, Orthodox churches, I'm always amused by the term Orthodox because it literally means in Greek straight thinking,
Yeah.
and I always think of orthodontia. It's like straight teeth. These are straight thinking Christians.
Yeah.
They read the New Testament and they said these other texts, they are blasphemy. They're an abyss of insanity. Avoid them at all costs. So that was a challenge.
What made so? What is it about these texts that was so provocative that they were literally buried or closeted away, as you said?
It's a question we've been asking ourselves for quite a while. And I think it's because they're hard to understand. They can be understood. They can only be connected. They can only be understood by someone who's had a kind of experience that that they to which they speak. It's sort of like reading a poem by Emily Dickinson.
Mm.
They're oblique, right? They're they're not necessarily self-explanatory, although they're very simple.
Yeah.
But if you have the experience that the poem is talking about, or if you have a sense of what this saying is about, you get it. But this isn't for beginners.
Mm. Yeah.
For example, in Judaism, all these traditions have two kinds of tradition. One is public tradition, basic, right? So in Judaism, it's the Torah, it's the Ten Commandments, it's the purity laws, which tell you what you should do and not do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and if you get into that and you practice it for quite a while, and you want to go deeper, you can probably find a teacher who will teach you Kabbalah,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is mystical teaching, which goes beyond the stories. And usually they didn't write it down because if you write it down, anybody can pick it up and read it, and they might really not understand it at all. But if you're a rabbi and you say this student is asking the kind of questions, I have to take this person deeper, then you go into those mystical teachings. But you don't do it in writing. You have to speak it, one person to the next.
Hmm.
Somebody wrote that stuff down
Mm-hmm.
in Christian tradition,
Hmm.
and some of it. And that's what we found.
Wow. Now, I think in passing in conversations with you before, you've mentioned to me too that there are things in that scripture that are also provocative because they say things along the lines of women being in power
Oh,
and
yes.
certain things that might be threatening to certain aspects of society today.
Well, what's most provocative about the Gospel of Thomas is that it says, it questions, who are you?
Hmm.
Who do you think you are? Carl Sublet, right? Elaine Pagels from Texas, from California, whatever. But there's a second level here where Jesus says, when people say to you, where do you come from? You don't say that. You say, we come from the light, the place where light came into being at the beginning of time. And then Jesus says, and when they say, who are you? You don't give your name or mine. You say, we are children of the light,
Hmm.
children of the Father. So the idea here is that it's not about you and me individually at all. It's about we.
Yes,
We,
a collective.
all of us come from the same place ultimately, from the source of the universe, whatever that mystery is. They call it the Father and the Mother in this text, the Mother being the Holy Spirit, a feminine image for the divine being. But anyway, we all come from that. And consequently, we all belong to the same family.
Yeah.
And if we do, then we're all children of the same family, just like Jesus.
Yeah.
So this text is attributed to Thomas, according to the Gospel of John, there was a disciple named Thomas Didymus, and that's a nickname. Thomas is a nickname in Aramaic for twin, and Didymus is a nickname in Greek for twin. This disciple's name was Judas, actually, but they called him Judas Thomas, the twin. He wasn't Judas Iscariot, of course, Judas Thomas. Here, he's an interlocutor of Jesus. And Jesus says to him, when you come to understand who you are, you'll understand that you and I are the same. And I will become you, and the mysteries will be revealed to you. So you and Jesus are not human and divine person up there, but the same kind of being. You're also like Jesus. Now that's blasphemy from the point of view of a Catholic church, any Orthodox church.
Wow. My brain is having a hard time understanding what would make that blasphemy. It's so beautiful. It's so
Well, it's also part of Jewish mystical tradition that we are all children of the same source. We all come from the same place. And if you use a metaphor like father and mother, then we're all in the same family, as I said. And the gospel of truth takes it further and says, all right. And if you're in the same family, then act like it. Then you should feed those who are hungry and take care of the sick and raise those who are on the ground and lift them up, because these are the children that the Father loves.
Yeah.
So that's your obligation now that you understand who you are
And
spiritually.
all roads are pointing back to Ubuntu.
Yes.
This takes me back to Ubuntu. I am because you are. The African Bantu philosophy.
Yes. And that's intuitive, especially as um, Bishop Tutu articulated it so beautifully in his book. Um, I think it is intuitive on a certain level. And this is just the Christian version of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ubuntu is another version of it.
Yeah.
And Jewish tradition is not different from Christian tradition here, because when this gospel was heard, told, written, there wasn't Christianity yet.
Yeah.
Jesus wasn't a Christian after all.
Yeah.
He was a Jew. And this is part of his tradition, this mystical tradition.
Yeah. This is the stuff that's so fascinating in your work, is it all kind of ties back to the same source and kind of upends a lot of our biases. Um, it's so fascinating. I can see, Elaine, your passion, and I could see how this undergrad work would just stoke a fire in you to want to learn more. I mean, if I were uncovering some of these things at the young age that you were, I could totally see. But it wasn't easy for you as a woman. I want to talk a little bit about you as a woman and what you were confronted with when you wanted to continue your studies.
It's confronting all the men. First, as you know, I mean, when I first applied to graduate school, I never forget, the letter I got from the dean saying, ordinarily, ordinarily we would admit a student with your qualifications. However, we've had very bad luck with women. They always quit. And we can't give a place in our graduate school. We have very few to offer to a woman. Uh, but if you're still serious next year, we'll admit you. So,
And they put it in writing.
it was really bizarre. But it was typical of Harvard at the time. It was typical. That's not unusual. Women were not supposed to be there. And when I finally did go there, it was very clear that women were not part of the game. It was all there for men. And there were 2 women, I think, when I was there, out of what, dozens.
Yeah. You and I share this, by the way. When I started architecture school in 1991, I
Yes.
believe I was one of 4 women in the program
Where was that?
at UT in Austin, University of Texas in Austin. And that was
Yes.
1991.
Yes, at 91. And architecture, of course, is a men's game, and so is everything else.
Right.
by the by the conventions with which we grew up.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what was going on with you personally at this time too, and what was happening in your life personally. So you eventually got into the program. Good for you. You did not accept no as an answer,
No,
and you
didn't.
you persisted, and I'm grateful that you did, and so is the world. But then, what's happening in your personal life at this point, Elaine?
Well, I was having a wonderful time exploring all of this. I had met a man that I adored. I mean, I didn't want to get married particularly because in the world from which I came, that meant you settle down and you and you know do something else. And I didn't really want to get married until I got the PhD, because when I told my advisor that I was leaving, that I was going to get married, he said, "What? We spent," he said, "What? We have wasted 4 years on your education and you're getting married?" And I said, "What do you mean? I'm not leaving." But women, he said, would always quit. And I now I understand they made them quit. They forced them to. They pressured them into it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, when a man says he's getting married, one of the other graduate students, you say, oh, good, now he'll settle down. She'll do typing and supporting, right? That's what they did too. That's what they did.
What year was this, Elaine? So we can have the
Oh,
context.
that was in the 1970s.
Yeah.
It's quite a while ago, fortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but I did marry a wonderful man, and that was just a great delight. He was absolutely wonderful, theoretical physicist who thought I was a little crazy for studying religion. But that's why I wrote the Gnostic Gospels in a approachable language, you know,
Yeah.
because his colleagues were these physicists or else they were artists. I mean, he had a lot of friends who were all over the map. And religion? Why? Why would you do that? You know?
Yeah.
And he felt the same way when we met. So I wanted to write for them. So my life was wonderful. And then we had a child that we adored. Um, and that was great. I got a job, although I was told I'd never be hired because they would never hire a woman. And I was lucky. I found somebody at Barnard College who hired me, partly because he was Jewish, and I didn't know this, but Jews were not hired at Columbia, Princeton, Harvard until quite recently. Can you believe that?
Wow. I cannot
That's
believe
true.
that.
That is true, and I
That's
didn't know it
important
either.
context given what's happening now in academia. Wow.
No, they weren't. Um, he couldn't get an academic appointment. He was a very well-known, famous writer, scholar, but there were no Jews on the Columbia faculty until Lionel Trilling was there. I think that's in the 1954 or something like that, or 60. I don't even remember. Certainly, there weren't at Princeton, and that's why they started the Institute for Advanced Study. A private family set it up so that people like Albert Einstein could find a place where they could be professors,
Wow.
right? It's right
Wow.
next door to me here.
Wow.
They weren't hired at Princeton.
What we could have possibly missed out on. My goodness.
Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing. And so he empathized, I suppose. He gave
He
you a
did.
shot.
He did. And we got along very well. So I love teaching and all of that. But then we discovered that our child, when he was born, and we were so eager to have this wonderful child. Um, After he was born, I was suddenly told by the doctors that there was a problem with his heart. So he had to have open heart surgery, and they had to wait until he was one because it's too difficult then. This is some 35 years ago to operate on a newborn. So they waited a year and operated and repaired his heart, and we were fine. My husband was at Rockefeller University doing theoretical physics, and I was teaching at Barnard, and we had this lovely child. Um, but sometime after that, we were going up to Colorado, and to take him up to Colorado, the doctors wanted to do a check on our son, and they did, and came back with the news that he had a congenital lung disease and would have a very short life. Um, when I finally dared say, how long? They said a few months to a few years with pulmonary hypertension. Um, some people live into their 20s and then they suddenly die because it's a disease that isn't visible,
Mm.
but the lungs just give out in the heart. Anyway, that's what happens. So we heard that news and then we had to live with that. And we did as well as we could. But he did die. And when he was 6.5, a wonderful child,
Mm.
full of joy and ideas and playfulness. Um, and we adopted a daughter. And a year later, I persuaded my husband to consider another adoption because we wanted more children. We didn't have more children then. I think I was too traumatized.
Yeah.
And so we adopted a second child. But when we went out to Aspen for the Aspen Center for Physics, as we always did every summer for 22 years, my husband suddenly died in an accident hiking, which he'd been hiking for 22 years. He loved to roam in the mountains. But that time he was showing one of his graduate students a path down Pyramid Peak. And there was obviously ice between the rocks, and it just went down 2,000 feet. So my life was shattered. It's the only word I could think of, shattered.
Elaine, I'm so sorry. And I can't imagine anything more tragic than losing a child. And then on the heels of that, your love.
No,
Uh, and the way in which you write about it is so beautiful. The way in which you tell their stories and honor their lives. Um, and as someone who loves to hike and be out in nature and also feels very connected to Aspen, it it's shocking. It's shocking. And but I will also say that the beautiful part of your story, and I would encourage people to read this book in honor of them, is how the community wrapped their arms around you there.
they did. And furthermore, Carla, I couldn't have written anything about it at the time. It was too overwhelming. Some people, as soon as some terrible thing happens, they write about it. I couldn't. It was like going into a black hole.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. It was overwhelming, the double loss, because I had to pick up everything, started a life which depended entirely on me and how I could support the children, and moved from New York to Princeton, where I was teaching, with two babies who needed constant attention. And so I wouldn't have been, I didn't write about it for 35 years until those children were grown up and out. And I had to think about it. And by that time, it was possible finally to look into that black hole and try to understand how all of that felt. That's when I wrote that book.
Mm.
But it came so much later. I didn't want to write a grief memoir because my agent had said to me, "Well, Elaine, if you can't write right now, why don't you write about grief?" And I said, "John, I hate grief. I'm not going to write about it.
I'm
I
not
don't
going
want
to
to
give that
become an
word.
expert and go on Oprah Winfrey and talk about grief. No, I'm not doing it." But finally, I was writing about the surprise, Carla, that I was still alive 35 years later, that I could have a new life, that I was joyful that these two children were growing up and I had friends and I had work I was doing. And that was such a surprise. I didn't know that could happen. I just couldn't have imagined it. And it was a great joy. That's why I thought at the end of the book of the Jewish prayer, which says, "Blessed art thou, Lord God of the universe, who has brought us alive to see this day,"
Hmm.
because I never could have imagined it. So I wanted to write about that,
Yeah.
not about the black hole, but the fact that sometimes people can come through that. And it's not an easy path for anyone. It's always different, but it's that's what I wanted to share.
Yes. And it reads that way. And I think we'll talk about this in a second. I think there's another chapter, there's an annex to this book that's been left out, which is another really magical part of this story. Uh, but the you're reminding me of something that we've talked about on the podcast before, which is this reminds me of Pema Chodron's writings.
Yes.
He talks about staying in the oh wow. The way you're describing it is, you're staying in the oh wow, in these moments that are so tragic and so painful, we can brace ourselves and we can grip and we can hang on to them, or we can release and soften to it and go into the oh wow. And it sounds like at this stage of your life, you are in the oh wow.
Yes, only decades later.
Of course.
Because before that, it was just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other and staying alive because I had two little children to take care of. I just thought sometimes you don't feel like staying alive at a point like that.
Yeah.
Um, but but I thought it's no honor to my husband to give up now. I've got these two children. He would have gone on. He would have remarried. He would have had a life.
Yeah.
And I loved his spirit so much. He
Yeah.
was wonderful that I just felt I had to honor him too.
Absolutely. Is that what got you through, Elaine? I mean, I'm sure there were many things that got you through, but how did you get through that period in your life? Was it your faith? Was it his
No,
arm?
I had no faith at that point.
Yeah, I
People
bet.
would say, "Oh, your faith must really help you." I thought, "What are you talking about? I just don't even know what you're talking about."
Yeah,
It was felt like I was under the ocean,
yeah,
and you're talking from the surface somewhere, and what? I don't know what faith, what God, what anything, what matters? Does anything matter?
yeah,
I had nothing then.
yeah.
Friends were helpful,
Mhm.
and having children to take care of was also helpful.
Yeah,
And then having work that explored questions about about how people cope with catastrophe.
yeah. How did you heal? Or is that even a fair question? Does one even heal?
I don't think there's a simple answer to that, and I don't know about healing. Certainly, I don't feel like I'm suffering from it now,
Mm,
but there was a lot of that,
yeah,
and the process of the children and the work and the friends, and then being outdoors in nature again, being back in the mountains, the beauty of it all, and that that helped.
yeah. You and I share that too. For me, nature is tremendously healing and fortifying. Uh,
Yes,
okay, so I want you to share the what I'm calling the annex chapter to this story of your life, which is there is a really fun part of this story, which is when you were promoting the book, Why Religion, you were on the Fresh Air podcast. And
yes,
and you were telling the story of the car accident and losing your dear friend. What I'll let you tell the rest of the story. What happened?
yes. Well, Terry Gross is interested in rock and roll, and so she was picked up on the fact that another person in the same car was Jerry Garcia, who I had known when I was in high school. He was bumming around California playing guitar, and he was in that accident with a friend of his, Alan Trist, who had come out of um, the Westminster School. Are you familiar with the Westminster School?
Sounds familiar, but I'm not sure if it's the same one I'm thinking of.
It was established by Elizabeth I at Westminster Abbey. Do you know that one?
Okay. Yes, 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 of course.
That's the same one?
Okay.
Yes. And so he was at this elite, you know, school in which they went to chapel every morning in Westminster Abbey under the bust of William Blake. He showed me
Alan?
the
Oh my
video.
goodness. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And he had a gap year between then and going to Cambridge University,
Okay.
where he'd been admitted. So his father was at Stanford for some um, uh, he was teaching, and
Mm.
in the Institute for Social Sciences. His father was a scholar, and he met Jerry Garcia, and they became buddies. So they were in that accident together. And after our friend was killed, we had a group that was very close after that. Um, just a group of friends. It wasn't as sexually close. It was just we called it the love scene because it was love. And these men like Jerry and Alan and the other weird people in our group could express that to each other and all of us.
Mm.
And that was a joy. That was a joy. And so anyway, telling you the long version, sorry. But
Love it.
um, Terry Gross said, "Oh, you knew Garcia?" I said, "Yes, yes." And Alan Trist went on to work with them for the next 35 years.
He's the manager of the Grateful Dead.
Yes, he was managing the publishing part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was a friend of theirs, and they called him after Cambridge University and said, "Why don't you work with us?" And he said, "I don't know anything about the rock and roll business and music publishing." They said, "Well, we don't care because we don't go to the big companies. We hire our friends, and you're one of us." He was very close to Jerry because of the accident. So he wrote me a letter. I got the letter from this person I hadn't seen, but I'd mentioned on the air because somebody told him that I talked about him on the air. And I thought, that's a surprise.
And this is
Can't-
2017-ish, like 2017?
Pardon me?
This in
It was 2019.
2019. Okay.
Yeah, he came to visit in Colorado, and we just there was this chemistry, you know. So he
How
was
many years later?
about 40 years.
Amazing.
And so, you know, he just stayed, and we got married about 2 years ago at the Pine Creek Cookout with all of their guests dancing at the end with a wonderful band. It
I,
was just marvelous.
I love it. And having had the chance to meet Alan and see the two of you together, it's aspirational. You are a sexy couple. It is so aspirational, Elaine.
Well, it's such a joy. I mean, he and I are both very surprised. It just works so well, and a very different kind of situation than I've ever been in before, but wonderful. So
Yeah.
yes, what a surprise.
What a surprise. Oh, wow. In the words of Him Token, oh, wow. That's amazing. We should all be so fortunate to be in love.
Yes.
So, okay, Elaine, I want to shift gears. I want to talk about miracles and wonder.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this gift. I feel super honored to get to sneak a peek at this book. And this is your most recent book, Miracles and Wonder, The Historical Mystery of Jesus. And I want to talk about your writing style. It makes me want to gobble up everything that you've ever written.
Mhm.
There is something that is so wonderful about the way in which you write. It's so approachable.
Mm.
And I was saying to you before we started recording, it's almost like a dialogue, like an invitation to come into the conversation with you. You pose questions. There's this curiosity there. And while you're talking about things that are probably just total lightning rods and very provocative, and I imagine that you attract quite a bit of potential, negativity as a result, there's something that's so innocent about it in the way in which you approach it. There's this curiosity, which I love.
Yeah.
It's not like a takedown. It's more of a what if.
Yeah. I that book, of course, hasn't been published yet. It's coming out on April Fool's Day.
Of course.
April 1st, this spring. And it's really I was I was asking myself a question at this point in my career, which, you know, it's been long, and I'm sort of happy um, to exempt myself from a lot of teaching at this point. I just want to do other things. Um, the questions were, what do we know historically about Jesus of Nazareth,
Mm.
and what don't we know? And what don't we don't know is pretty much 90%. The first gospel story, as you see, is it's 15 or 17 pages, the Gospel of Mark. That's
Yeah.
all. That's all we know. And the others are written from that and from things that were added, things he said, so forth. So I was saying, wait a minute, I've been teaching this stuff for so long, and I love to teach it. What is it that makes these stories so compelling? They're pretty simple. I mean, on the surface, Mark is a very simple story, just a 15-page narrative, goes very quickly. But there's something much deeper in these stories that I found very compelling. And I also wanted to say, what what happens if you read those stories and you put the secret gospels next to them?
Hmm.
If you say, okay, that's the start, that's where the public teaching of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Then if you move from that to the secret teaching of Jesus, how does that widen and deepen your picture of what this movement was about or what it suggests now? So, and why do we still love those stories? Any of us who do, and
Yeah.
some people don't, but a lot of people take them as templates for their lives, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think is so powerful about your work. So you have this reverence, if you will. You have this faith, and at the same time, you're questioning scripts that a lot of people take scripture that a lot of people take as dogmatic.
Yes.
They use it at one. I highlighted it at one point. You said, and I'm not going to be able to find it right now, but you said something to the effect of it's used for both. I'm going to get it wrong, but it was like both to judge, both in judgment and an inspiration.
Yes, yes.
And so, you know, what do you say to people who take these scriptures to be like absolutely true, even though through your work and studying of history, they start to kind of dismantle some of the facts around them?
Well, it's a different thing to say they're absolutely true and to say they're literally absolutely true,
That's where I'm going with it.
because you can feel they're deeply true, right?
Mhm.
But that's quite different from saying it happened exactly the way it's told. Um, the birth of Jesus, for example, he's called the Son of God. All of the Gospels call him that, and the secret Gospels often speak of him as God's Son. Do we have to take that literally? That somehow this involves his biological generation? That's the way Matthew and Luke take it.
Mhm.
But Mark and John tell the story of Jesus without that story,
Right.
and they don't seem to need it. They're writing independently. That's the
Right.
important thing to remember. They're not reading each other.
Yeah. I think
So, yeah.
go ahead, Elaine, please.
But then if you take the Gospel of Thomas and it says, "You, Carla, are also the child of God. We are all children of God," then you're not talking biologically at all. It's a metaphor for some deep intuitive sense of who you are and how you're connected with the source of all life, right? With God, whatever we call
Yeah. And you start off the book with, you know, quite a bit of a bang, pun unintended, and that you're questioning, whether Mary was actually a virgin and how Jesus may have been conceived and whether it's literal or a metaphor. And you start to point out, the different approaches in the different books with respect to his birth. Say more about that. How does that question come about in your mind and what are you exploring in that?
it. Well, some of the things that come in the Christian creeds, like Jesus is born of the Virgin Mary, um, have been questioned for forever. And many people are told, don't ask that question, or that's wrong because it was a miracle. And it may have been. Um, but I remember when I first was teaching at Barnard, I was invited by Raymond Brown, Roman Catholic Sulpician priest. He was writing a book about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And he had 6 Catholic men and 6 Protestant men sitting around a big table in Union Seminary, big oak table. And I was the only woman, and I was fresh out of graduate school. But I think he thought maybe he should invite me, so he did. And I heard these men talking about how Mary became pregnant. And frankly, my reaction was, I can't laugh. Really?
It,
That's what, through the ear? I mean, this is a medieval view that Mary conceived through the ear.
Mhm.
To the words. How do you conceive a child through words? Well, God could do anything, right? Okay. Anyway, I just thought, what? Do you really think you have to believe that way
Yeah,
to speak about this man comes from God? John's gospel doesn't do that. Just
yeah,
says, where does he come from?
yeah,
Comes from God. That's enough. And Mark does the same.
yeah,
But later gospels felt that, I think, because they wanted to connect him with the genealogy of the kings of Israel, both Matthew and Luke say it's hard to say Jesus is the Messiah when he comes from rural Galilee from a humble workshop of a carpenter. How can he be a king?
mm,
So I was going to say they make up stories. They think about how that could happen, and they read the prophecies. They read Isaiah's prophecy: "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you will call his name God with us, Emmanuel." Right? And so they say, well, it's a sign. It's a sign. Isaiah predicted it. And Matthew creates a beautiful story around that. And the prophecies of Isaiah are incorporated in the way he tells the story. Because he said, well, this is how it might have happened.
Yeah.
And Luke tells a completely different story. But if you were you ever at a Christmas pageant?
I wasn't in it, but I've been to several.
Well, you see that there are wise men, that there are representatives of kings who bring gold and frankincense and fir, and you see their shepherds and their lambs and their angels. And so what they do is they take the two birth stories, which are completely independently written and different, totally different, and they just combine them. I mean, I grew up on that too.
Yeah.
So I never noticed there were two stories and not one, very different.
Yeah.
And each of them is trying to connect Jesus to the lineage of the kings of Israel because that would legitimize him in the eyes of Orthodox Jews as an appropriate heir to King David.
Yeah.
But
Even that is confusing if he was the child of God and conceived immaculately. So because
well,
technically there is no paternal line, so it's still kind of confusing.
well, yes, it is confusing, especially the way they tell it. But if you'll notice, Luke will also say he traces Jesus' lineage not back to Abraham as Matthew does. He says back to Adam, whom he calls son of God. So Adam is called son of God. Now, if Adam is a human and is the son of God, can't Jesus be a human and be son of God? But because of the idea created long after those stories are told that Jesus is actually God in person,
Yeah.
um, then they have to create a different kind of story. I mean, I think those stories were made up, and most historical scholars think so too, but they don't usually say so in a public writing. And I just thought, why they be condescending
Hmm.
to other Christians? I went to ask my favorite teacher, Krista Stendahl, this. He was the Archbishop of Sweden, very formidable, remarkable, marvelous human being. I said, Krister, why didn't you talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls? He said, well, because it would make Jesus look like a lot of other prophets of his time. And
Hmm.
I said, but Krister, that's so condescending.
Hmm.
And he said, well, we clergy are very condescending.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Well, I will say what I also love about your writing and actually your mind and the way that you think is that you are not binary in your thinking. You hold multiple things to be true and you have an open mind in your approach. You're curious and you're unpacking these things. But literally in your book, you're stating, look, Mary could have been raped. It's quite plausible. It could have been that she had sex before marriage. It could have been a miracle. And here are all the historical circumstances around it, which I find it, to your point, instead of being condescending to the reader, you're letting the reader come to their own conclusions.
The issue, using the word like rape, is not a casual thing here, because when Matthew and Luke tell the birth stories, they both insist that Joseph is not the father of Jesus. It's
Mhm.
not that he and Mary had a child before they were married. Um, he says it was not his child, and she was disgraced. He was going to do what a man does when his fiancee is pregnant and it's not his child. You just you don't shame her if she was complicit in being sexually unfaithful to her fiancé. Then you stone her to death. This is ancient law. But if she's been forced against her will, then she's not complicit. So you don't shame her, but you do decide to break the marriage contract. And that's what Joseph does. So there are many clues in Matthew, in Luke, but especially in what we know about the history of Judea in the first century. Roman soldiers were living, thousands of them, within walking distance of Nazareth. And Galilean Jews were very concerned about protecting their daughters and also their sons from sexual assault, because any local Jew who had been with a Roman soldier, except people who were colluding with them, was assumed to have been raped. So this is not a casual suggestion. It's something that happened very often in that time and place. But we don't think of the military situation, the political situation. Jesus' death is all about Roman occupation and Romans ordering a crucifixion of a man because he's accused of inciting insurrection against Rome, revolution.
Yeah, I learned that in
Charge.
your book. I had never thought about it from the standpoint of the role of Rome in his crucifixion, interestingly enough.
Totally.
Um,
Totally. That's what it's about. When it says at the top of the cross, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, um, it's 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 a snide, nasty way of saying, "Hey, you want a Jewish king?
mm,
Try it. Just see what happens to you." This
mhm.
man thought he was a king. He apparently went into Jerusalem, allowing people to treat him as though he were coming in as a king.
Yeah,
Hey, he got arrested
yeah.
very soon after that, and he got what he deserved because that's what happens to revolutionaries when their country is occupied by a foreign power.
Mm. Your providing of a historical context to these stories brings so much more richness to them and so much more learning. It makes them contemporary in terms of what we're dealing with today.
It is, yeah, it does. I mean, life is not so different.
No,
Um,
it's
I
not.
mean, we have many privileges that they didn't,
Yeah,
um, but there are people all over the world who live as people lived then in Galilee and very primitive. I don't mean socially primitive, but in deprived situations, like people in many parts of the Middle East and Africa, Latin America.
yeah. The other thing that I think is important to mention is your book reminds us that these are also stories of hope.
That's what I love about these stories. And I hadn't thought of it, Carl,
Hmm.
because I always thought, okay, Jesus is healing a blind man. Let's skip over that to the teaching.
Yeah.
Um,
Wait a minute. He just healed a blind man.
because actually, when I was in the black hole of grief, I asked myself at that time, so what of all of this matters to me? The stuff I'm teaching and reading about.
Mm,
And it wasn't belief in God or anything. It was the teaching of Jesus about how we are to love each other.
mm,
So I sort of clung to that. The teaching is very important.
yeah,
And that's what Jesus is known for his attitude toward other people, is merciful and generous and also demanding
yeah,
teaching.
yeah.
But this time around, I thought the miracles are what are so amazing. And I felt was so surprised myself in my own life to have such joy after so much catastrophe. And so when people say, what's a miracle? It's partly an interpretation.
Yeah.
A miracle, you can say, one of my friends said she was hit by a car near here on Washington Road with cars going very fast. She was thrown 20 feet and she landed with no injuries. And she said, it's a miracle. And I thought somebody else would have said, I was lucky. Wow, what a fluke.
Yeah.
So a miracle is an interpretation of some transformative event.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people don't think they exist.
Yeah.
Um, I There is a line from the Grateful Dead song that says, "I need a miracle every day."
I love it. I love it that you brought it back to the Grateful Dead. You're so cool, Elaine. Okay, so it's interesting that you talk about how you perceive Jesus and what his life is teaching us today, because I definitely feel like you live that. And that became evident to me this summer when we met for coffee You just come out of a yoga class. I'm sharing this because you're so aspirational to me. You just come out of a yoga class and we met for coffee and you told me the story of Halem flowers.
Oh, yes. And you met him, or you
I did. Well, I've been communicating with him. Yes. And so
and
I
you
I would love for you to tell our audience this story because it says so much about you and who you
oh,
are and how you live your life. And it's so inspiring.
yeah, and just recently, well, we had another episode like that, not quite. Yeah, it was about, I don't remember when I first got letters from people who are incarcerated, but often they have nothing to do and they write to people who they see on television or something. So I got letters like that, and some of them are incoherent, and some of them are asking for things that no one can give them outside. But I got one that really struck me. It was from a young man who said he had been sentenced to 2 life terms at the age of 16. And what that said is it's homicide, right?
Mhm.
We didn't talk about the details, but he was in it for life, and in a prison which housed thousands of young Black men. He was, as I said, 16 when he was arrested and imprisoned. Um, and he wrote me a letter and said, I've been in this prison for a long time. And at a certain point, I couldn't stand it anymore. And I turned my life over to Allah. I submitted to the will of God. And he had a conversion. His family had been Black Muslim, but he converted to real Islam, what he read in the autobiography of Malcolm X, in which it embraces all human beings, as human brothers.
Here we are again.
So he said, but I read something about you in a magazine, he said, and it said that even though you're identifying as a Christian, you're criticizing the tradition too. How can you criticize a tradition when you're committed to it? I thought, what a good question, because he was thinking about it. And I said, uh, I responded to the question. Also, he wrote as somebody who had never been to high school. He probably hadn't, but he wrote beautifully in Arabic. He taught himself Arabic in prison,
Wow.
and it was beautiful writing graphically. So I wrote him back and talked about that, and then I sent him a lot of books. Uh, I sent him books that would be useful to him, and then I kept corresponding with him from time to time. He wrote me a lot of letters, and I still have them. I still have some of the first one he wrote me. I have it. Um, and after he'd been in prison for 20 years, and then he was then 36, I think. The law changed that if you'd been sentenced to life or execution before you were 18, you could make an appeal. So he made an appeal, and by then he was a model prisoner. He'd been writing things in prison. He'd been talking to people. He'd been taking courses. He'd been helping out. Everybody was admiring and loving of this man who was so different.
He was even auditing your courses at Princeton, if I'm not mistaken, right? Wasn't he joining your course from time to time?
No, that didn't. That happened later. There were
Okay.
people who went into the prison and were teaching courses.
Oh,
So
got
he
it.
took courses from other people who were in the prisons in Georgia, in DC, and there in various places. And there are people from Princeton who do teach in a Princeton in Trenton, but I wasn't doing it.
Okay.
So, but he read some of my books. And anyway, his lawyer asked me to write a letter for him. And I wrote a letter and I said, he's never told me he didn't deserve his sentence, even though he hadn't pulled the trigger. Um, he never said, I'm innocent. He just said, I've repented.
Mm.
I'm transformed, you know? And he was released. And then during the pandemic, he married. He and his wife have a beautiful child.
Mm.
And he started to paint. And now his paintings are well known. It's kind of like street painting, as you see, like Basquiat, Basquiat, but it's not dark and and uh, it's not dark and
It's uplifting.
dismal. I don't know what the word
Yeah,
is.
yeah, it's uplifting. It's all about human connection and love and
It's about love. It's about love is the vaccine. It's about God. It's about a man who has found peace and joy. And he came to visit me at Princeton. It was last year. And that was filmed by the filmmaker who had filmed him going into prison. When he came and he came into my seminar, he had previously been, I'd invited him into my seminar the year before when he was still in for, he would then in by, he'd been in jail for 21 years. We were reading the autobiography of Malcolm X and the autobiography of a Christian woman in North Africa who was in prison, wrote a diary before she was executed on charges of being a Christian in the public arena, tortured to death.
Hmm.
We were going to read those two, and I thought, wait a minute. And they both had prison conversions. And so Halem had a prison conversion. So I called the prison, I think that was in Georgia then, and asked if he could come into my seminar on speakerphone. That's maybe what you were thinking about. And was in the center of our table on speaker, talking about submitting to Allah in solitary confinement. And the students were just speechless.
I
Didn't
can't
know
imagine
what to
how
say.
powerful. Yeah, I can't imagine how proximate and powerful that was.
They had never any idea. And then later, when he came a year ago, we did have a seminar, and he came in and he spoke with all of our students in a seminar. It was an amazing day.
Well, that's I love that you have and you now have a continued friendship in person with
We
him.
do. Well, I told you he has an agent in Aspen, nothing less.
That's so
I
funny.
thought, oh, we meet through his art agent in Aspen. Okay.
Okay. So I have a secret fantasy of you, me, and Halem going to have coffee or dinner together in Aspen.
Well, it could happen because I think his agent is still there. Um, he's been very he came up to our house when he came to Aspen last year, and we had a wonderful talk with him. He's such a beautiful man. Did you meet him in person?
Not yet. No, but I hope to. I really hope to.
He has a spirit of openness and calm, and uh, it's it's palpable.
Yeah. Well, as soon as I reached out and mentioned that I knew you, he was so, I mean, the way he speaks about you is so beautiful. And it was just, he was so open and so kind. So I hope to meet him someday. Okay, Elaine, I, before I let you go, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this topic because I find it so fascinating. And I remember asking you your permission before we
Yeah.
went here. But and please tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but you have served as an advisor to some of the studies that are happening at different universities um, and programs around hallucinogenics and around the spiritual experiences that people are having. Will you tell us a little bit about that and what your role is there?
Yes, I got a call about 3 years ago from a psychiatrist at New York University Medical School, and he said he was doing studies, controlled studies, with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushrooms, um, to deal with patients who were having either PTSD or trauma about terminal cancer diagnosis, because this doctor, Anthony Bossis, is primarily concerned with uh, counseling people about terminal illness. He's a hospice psychiatrist. And he said they were just deciding because so many people in these studies then had actually amazing spiritual experiences, which they didn't expect and had never had in their lives, that the researchers, both at NYU and New York University, decided to invite a group of participants, volunteers, who were religious professionals, as they call them. They're priests, ministers, rabbis, Buddhist teachers, you name it, imams. They invited about 24 people and they carefully selected them. They'd never had psychedelics in their lives, any of them. That was part of the requirement. And they went through an elaborate protocol, as they do with all patients who receive that um, psilocybin as a treatment for PTSD or depression or anorexia or many other conditions which are uh, alleviated by the use of this medication. And and so these people went through the same protocols, a lot of preparation, a lot of discussion, a lot of being told what to expect, find a safe place, being right here, and somebody, there are medical people right there if you need help. Um, they went through that, and the results are astonishing. Um, they, the people in that study, I've met about 15 of them, speak with such amazement and glowing terms about the surprise of opening up a kind of spiritual awareness that these rabbis and priests and ministers had never experienced in that way. It was not about teaching dogma or teaching about Jesus or Jewish tradition or Buddhist tradition. It was what you said. It's a spiritual experience quite beyond anything that's captured in those denominational categories.
Mhm.
And so these researchers asked me, they said, we want to present it to a wider public, this research. And we thought you might be a good person to do it because you're not either, a scientist or a religious professional, but you're sort of exploring this academically. So would you introduce it to a wider public at the World Council of Parliament of World Religions? That was a tryout session. The room was totally packed. And the people who spoke on the panel that I chaired were either people who participated in the trials or people who had administered them. And it was a very interesting session. Recently, though, Carla, that research has been entirely put on hold, as you may know, um, by government agencies.
Mm.
And that paper is called the most controversial paper ever written. It's never been published because some of the people at one of the medical schools is quite concerned that they wouldn't be seen as scientific because it speaks as if science can say something about spiritual experience in which it's respected and seen as an actual genuine kind of experience. So there's controversy still, but I think it's a very interesting avenue of research.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just my own personal experience with psilocybin was very transformational. You and I have talked about it. It was a
Yeah.
very spiritual and ineffable experience for me. Um, and it's and you and I also talked about the telepathy tapes,
Yes.
which broaches this topic as well in terms of the powers of science trying to repress information because it doesn't align with materialism. And so it's I think again this is one of the reasons why I admire your work so much is because you aren't binary. You're both kind of a researcher and almost scientific in your approach, but you're open-minded. And I feel like you are so pragmatic, yet at the same time, a deeply spiritual person, which I find fascinating.
Well, Carla, what made that also obvious to me was my late husband, theoretical physicist. Um, when he was doing his doctorate at Stanford in theoretical physics, he volunteered at the Veterans Hospital in a double-blind experiment in which the researchers would be given LSD or they would be given a placebo. And
Mhm.
he'd been curious. He'd read Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception. He'd read about these things. He wanted to see what it was like. So he did that and he said, this is amazing. I had an amazing experience. Although he was warned by his physics professor that it would ruin his brain, it didn't.
Probably
And
open
he
you
was
up.
also open to that. At the same time, Stanford Research Center, which is a scientific facility, was studying telepathy, out of body experiences, and all kinds of things. And my husband was also interested in that. So he was not a scientific materialist. He was a scientist who knew how open scientific questions can be,
Mm.
and was open to that kind of exploration.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's evident in you and in your work. He lives on in you in that way, and you honor him in that way.
Thank
And
you.
Elaine, what is your wish for this new book, Miracles and Wonder? What's your
Well,
hope?
what I wanted to do, Carla, is speak about what I love about these stories, and the question of why do people still convert to Christianity today?
Mhm.
Why do artists that I love um, still use paintings of Jesus's life, Mary Magdalene, to say something about themselves? So I chose three artists. In the book, there will be a photo inset of these paintings, which show paintings by Salvador Dali and by Marc Chagall, um, and Titus Kaphar. I don't know if you know Titus's work.
Yes.
I mentioned that.
Mhm.
These are 20th, 21st century paintings of crucifixion, but they have very different qualities of meaning, and yet they speak very powerfully. And I chose three films that have that kind of power, and then looked at people converting to Christianity, because this isn't some archaic thing. And I also would like people to understand that anything that's said about Christianity, as you said at the beginning, is not about Christianity. It's about the qualities of human experience.
Mhm.
It's about the varieties of the experience that we often have as people. Sometimes people with no religious background at all in any tradition spontaneously have experiences that surprise them and overwhelm them and change their lives. That happens. And that to me is the deepest power that gave birth to these traditions. The traditions are just codifications of various versions of it. As you said, what Africans talking about Ubuntu have in mind is, is the same kind of thing you see in the Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah.
So it's not belonging to one tradition or another. It's a human experience for which this kind of language um, gives voice,
Yeah.
many kinds of different voices.
Yeah. And I don't know, you and I don't know if we've talked about this, but as a kid, my father was agnostic and my mom's an atheist. But as a kid, they told us that religion was a very personal choice. And they would support us going anywhere we wanted, and they'd be happy to take us or drop us off with friends. And we were fortunate enough to grow up in a very religiously diverse part of Dallas. So we had a big Jewish population, Greek Orthodox, Unitarian, almost every Christian denomination. I wasn't exposed as much to Buddhism or Hinduism or Muslimism at that stage of the game, but early on as a child, I started to see the interconnectedness.
Oh, wow.
And
That's great because you went to different places.
yeah, we experienced all of them. And then when the kids were when I had kids of my own, when they were 10 and 13, we traveled the world. And
Yes.
unbeknownst to us, we hit every major religion's Holy Week by accident where we landed.
Really? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I
so
saw some of the photographs. Oh, that's
oh,
amazing.
you're so sweet to look. Uh,
Was that the spring?
it was spring. Yeah.
So it was Holy Week or it was Ramadan? Oh,
Exactly. It's so we hit all the significant holy weeks all the way to Semana Santa in Mexico. And so it was so wild to see the connection between,
wow.
Catholicism and Buddhism, and see all these interconnected points. So it's also why I'm super attracted to the work that you do, because I think it brings that to light as well.
Yes, I think that's a very important part of it. And, um, many people think that religion is obsolete and it's going away. I don't think that's not going to happen because this is part of our experience and part that we need. And I think especially to look for changes in the world in a direction that embraces all people. I don't think we can do that without a spiritual core, without an impetus from people. And they don't have to be religious; they can be atheists, but to have the same sense of connectedness of the human race, I think that's a very deep message that goes through so many of these traditions.
Yeah, never have we needed it more to be a part of something larger than ourselves, I think,
Yes.
and to be connected to one another. Well, Elaine, I'm grateful that you came on and you spent so much time with me today. I'm grateful for your friendship.
Well, I love talking with you, Carla. It's just wonderful to see you and look forward to seeing you more in Colorado.
Yeah, hopefully I'll see you at the next board meeting, and I can't wait.
Well, I feel the same way. Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much. Take care.
Thank y'all for listening today. If you're so inclined, please follow, subscribe, download, share, all of the things so that we can keep going. We appreciate your support so much. If you're interested in learning more, go to thecoeffect.co.